So the video you just saw there was one that I made in a Blender, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how I made it. You can see here it's going to be this phone model we're going to download. I'm going to show you how to add the apps and all of that on there with the glow screen. We're going to do some minor modifications. Then I'm going to show you how to do this cool crack effect with just texture. So as the phone hits, it's just going to fracture. It's going to look like it fractures. So we're going to have all of these particles, and it's going to be in slow motion, and then all of a sudden it's just going to speed up. So we're going to be touching some rigid body stuff. We're going to be touching how to keyframe the different speeds of the simulations. We're going to be doing particle stuff, and I'm going to be uploading my original result to my Patreon as well. If you guys want to check that out in the description, all of the different resources that are free, they're going to be included below the things we're going to be using. So if this is something you guys want to learn, if you want to see how I did this, keep watching, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy this tutorial. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so there are a few assets we're going to want to download before we get started here. The first one is going to be this texture here with the cracks. I'm going to put a link to it in the description below. And also I'd like to give full credit to this site here for this resource, and you can read all about the usage rights and stuff here. Just go to free download and then download the largest one you can without having to get the paid one. Then you're going to get this one here on Unsplash, which I'll put a link to in the description below. You can use whatever one. You can even take a photo of your own, but just make sure it doesn't have too much glare. So I'm going to put a link to this. Go ahead. It's a free download as well. Get the biggest size you can. And then you're going to also want to download this model here on Sketchfab. And by the way, full credit to this person here. And you can read here, it's CC attribution. So as long as you give attribution here, you're allowed to use it, remix it, even for commercial purposes. So that's what you're allowed to use that for. So go ahead, download these free. I've already done that, so you can see here in my downloads folder. The phone is the only one that comes as a zip, so make sure to extract that. And then inside of there is a simple blend file. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and open that source, take it, drag it to the desktop, and instead of opening up this one here, what we're going to do, we're going to open up a fresh scene in Blender, just so we get into fresh scene. I'm going to select everything. I'm going to just press delete, go to file, and then we're going to go to append because we're dealing with another blend file. Go to the desktop wherever you have that extracted. Double click on it and then go over to object. Press A to select everything in here and then go append. Okay, and here you can see it comes in. It's really small. Just select this light. We don't need that. Just delete that. And then go into the front orthographic view by pressing 1 on the number pad. And what we're going to do is we're going to just select everything in here. We're going to go G, X, and we're going to move it into the middle as much as possible. Okay, just getting it roughly in the middle like this. Go to your right orthographic view by pressing 3. It all looks okay. You just want to make sure it's nice and in the middle of the scene. And from here, we're just going to do a few more things to make this look more like the phone we want. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select this front bit. In fact, it's actually connected to the back. You can see there, it's all one bit. Just select that, tab into edit mode, and then go into your right orthographic view. And what we're going to do is we're going to press Z, go into wireframe, and then just select all of the verts that make up that front glass panel. And here I'm just growing the selection a little bit by going Control plus, just to make sure I got it all. And then when I have about that much, I'm going to go P, and I'm going to go separate by selection. So now it's its own piece. Tab back out into object mode, and here we have a piece of glass. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go M, new collection. I'm just going to call it glass. And that's our glass plane, just to be organized. And over here, we already have all of our main stuff in the default collection. And now we have the glass, we have that screen. And I'm just gonna double click on that object, just call it screen. What I'm gonna do now is just hide this glass collection, that's front glass bit. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna make that inner part that's gonna have the glowing screen underneath the glass. Maybe actually, let's hide the rest of the stuff and bring back that glass. Let's just tab into edit mode for that object, Shift Alt left click just to loop select all of these verts here, and then go Shift D to duplicate. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go F to fill it, and then you're going to go P and then go separate by selection. Tab back out, and now what we have here is a screen. So let's now take this glowy bit, right? Let's just go M, new collection. Let's just call this in fact, let's not create a new collection. I'm just going to undo that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go M and just move it to the main collection. Okay, so it's now part of the phone. I'm going to hide the glass bit again. And now we only have this bit in here, which is exactly what we want. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our, just real quick, go to our render settings. Let's just quickly change it to cycles because we're going to be working with cycles materials. I'm just going to change my GPU to, my device to a GPU. You can leave it a CPU if you don't have one. But let's go to our materials now. And with this, let's get rid of these default materials here, the shaders, and let's just go new. Let's just call it glow screen thingy. Call it whatever you want, honestly. I'm just being very uncreative. And I'm going to go to my base color, click on that. Let's get an image texture. I'm going to go to open, and then I'm going to go to my downloads and get that thing I told you guys to download. Goodness, I've forgotten the name of it. Yeah, the Unsplash image, and then go open image. And now if you press Z and you go material preview, you're not going to see anything because we don't have any UV coordinates. So let's go to our UV editing, and let's just come to our drop down here and get that for a reference. And let's go into our front orthographic view with this object here, this glowy screen thing. In edit mode, I'm just selecting all of the geometry by pressing A, and I'm going to go U. Let's project from view. And over here, while you actually over here go Z, material preview. Now over here, you can select this bit and you can go S to scale it up, G to move it, and just roughly get it in place. Okay, don't worry too much about being absolutely just perfect with it. Just scale it as much as possible, get it roughly in place, and try not to scale it too much in any one of the directions. You might make it look a little bit stretched. Don't do it too much, but something like this should be fine. Then go into the shading workspace, and once again with this phone, what we want to do here with this new screen material, we don't want it to be principled. We're going to go Shift A, search, and just type in E, and then get an emission. And let's take this color output from the image texture, plug it into the color of the emission, and then bypass that principled into the material output. And now this has a glowy thing going on. In fact, if we go over to our world and we just drag that down into the darker values and go Z and go rendered, we can see that's actually glowing and everything else is dark. We'll leave it at a default strength of 1, and that's pretty much done. Now let's come over here to our collections. We're still in our shading workspace. Let's enable the glass, and the glass we can't see because that doesn't have a material yet. So select the glass, go to the materials. In fact, it does have a material, but we're going to get rid of these materials. We're going to go new, and let's just give that glass a glass material. Let's call it glass. And under the principled, what we're going to do to make this glass is give it a full value on the transmission. And up here on the principled roughness, let's take that almost all the way down. I never like to set things really all the way down to 0 because in real life you have roughness everywhere. So we're going to go Z, rendered, and we should now be able to see through the glass. Now, you're not actually picking the glass up very well because, well, what's happening here is we don't have any surfaces reflecting on here. We don't have a HDRI or anything. So let's just go to our world's environment. Let's just actually, for now, just click on here. Let's just give it a sky texture. But let's just also come to that sky texture, make it something like 0.05. Give it a really low value. And let's just also go into our front view, Shift A. Let's go to our light options, give it an area light, move it over, rotate it just for now so we can see what's going on, and rotate it in. And I'm going to scale this way down. Okay, now we have a light here. You guys get the idea here. We have our phone. Let's go back to our layout. I'm going to grab this light for now. I'm going to press M, new collection. Let's just call this stage. That's where all of our lighting and stuff is going to be. And let's just hide that for now. And what we want to do now, eventually we're going to run a physics simulation rigid body, but we don't want to add it to this whole thing. There's a lot of geometry here. So a simple little cheat is to go Shift A, simply just go add in a cube, tab into edit mode, S to scale it all down. And don't do this in object mode, otherwise you have to unnecessarily apply the scale. So let's just go scale it down till it's almost the exact width of our phone. And then we're going to quickly tab out because we have our origin point here in the middle. So let's just select everything else that makes up our phone. In fact, select the cube, Control I, inverse the selection object mode, so everything is active. And then go G, Z, move it down till it's roughly in the middle of our world environment or our world scene. Now select this cube again, tab into edit mode, and now go S, Z, and roughly scale it up. The reason we're doing that, we want that origin point of this cube, this bounding cube, to be roughly in the middle of that phone as much as possible. And from here, you can just select the different verts and get them as close as you possibly can to the dimensions of the phone. Go to the right orthographic and make sure that box is also nice and skinny on the y-axis. Okay, so we have these sharp corners here, which can be a bit of an issue. So what we're going to simply do is go to our edge select and just select these edges. I'm just holding in shift while I'm doing that. So I can select all four of them. Go into the front view and then go Control B and make a bevel. Then roll the middle mouse button to add in more segments and just get it roughly to the shape of the phone, like that. Now tab back out, go into solid, and you're obviously not going to see anything. So what you can do is you can go to your object properties for this thing here. You can go over to your viewport display and let's go to texture display as and change it to wire. But if you were to go Z and go render, you're going to see all of that. So let's actually go also to our visibility. Let's turn it off for render so it doesn't show in the final render. But let's just also turn off a few of these here as well, so it doesn't show in the actual viewport render as well. Shadow, turn it all off. Okay, so we only have this object here which will do the physics for us. We can parent everything to it, but it's not going to be rendered. So now we have this guy active. Let's go Control I to invert the selection so we have all of the phone bits. Make sure the glass and the collection. Then holding in shift, select this new object we created. Control P, object, keep transform. And now we have everything parented to this. We can run our simulation with this rough approximate of a phone, which is relatively low poly as well. G, Z, and just move it up for now, about here. And by the way, make sure you're saving as you go. Let's just also make sure we grab that cube object that's going to be our, that all of our phone is parented to, this thing right here. Let's just click on it and call it main obj, just for main object. And let's take that and let's just actually drag it into the main collection, right? Where all of our phone is at the moment. So you can see here underneath that, these are all the things that are parented to it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select that screen that we separated earlier. And we added a glass material to. But what we're going to do, we're also going to enable our stage, right? So we have our light in here. Let's just go Z and then go rendered. In fact, let's just go into our shading workspace to do that. So just make sure you're in your rendered view. And with this glass material, we're going to do a few things here. And we're going to start by bringing in that crack image. We're going to go Shift A, search, type an image, and then get an image texture. Click on open, and for me, that's in my downloads. I'm just going to get that black crack texture. I'm going to take it, and instead of just dragging it into the base color, we're going to do a few more things with it. So in this case, I am going to drag it into the base color. But I'm also going to go Shift A, I'm going to go search, and I'm going to go color and get a color ramp, place it in here. And I'm going to drag this black value to the end and then bring this white value down here. I'll get to that in a minute. But what we're also going to do is we're going to go into our UV editing workspace. And what we need to do here is go Z and then go material preview. And we need to come over here to the drop down and let's go to black cracked background, which is this thing here. Go into the front orthographic view of that screen, press A to select everything, and then go U, and then go project from view. And then what you can do over here is you can rotate this, and you can go G, and you can move it, and you can place it wherever you want. But what I want is the crack to be on this corner here. But you can do this however you want. So now if we go Z and we go rendered, you're not going to be able to see much, but if you go back into your shading workspace, what we can do now is we can move these two nodes up. We can go Shift A, search, and let's just get a bump. And get a bump node. Let's plug the color into the height. And let's make it 0.25 on the strength. And let's plug that normal into the normal of the principled. And now you can see we have these cracks coming through a little bit now. And what you can do is if you get an angle where you can kind of see it really well, you can actually just go back to your UV editing and you can now move this around. So I'm going to stick with what I've got here. I'm just going to make sure that smash is right on the corner here going up like that, but that looks pretty cool. So there we have that. Now let's just quickly go back to our shading that we have the texture sorted out. And we're going to do something here. The way we're going to make this texture appear is by switching between a fresh glass material and this one that has the texture on it. So let's just actually take this principled shader, Shift D to duplicate it, drag it underneath the previous one, we duplicate it. Then over here, we're going to go Shift A, search, and we're going to get a mix. And we're going to get a mix shader, place it on the top cable that goes into the material output. And now take this fresh principled and plug it into the bottom of the mix shader. And now what we have is a slider with the factor. If we take it all the way to 0, we see the top one. All the way up to 1, we see the fresh unsmashed glass. So what we're actually going to do with this one, this is going to be the thing that we're going to animate later. Let's just for now leave it at a value of 0 with the cracks. Let's go back to our layout. And now what we're going to do is we're going to delve into setting up our little rigid body simulation here. Okay, so first of all, let's start by going to our timeline. So we want to work with 150 frames. So we're going to click on the end frame value. Let's make it 150 instead of 250. That's going to be more than enough for what we're doing. Let's drag up our timeline here so we can see it nicely. And what we need to do is give this phone, the main object here that everything's parented to, we need to give that some physics properties. But before we do that, let's give it something to land on. Okay, so instead of making it actually interact with the stage we're going to be putting there, we're going to eventually, it's better just to create an object, a standalone object that won't show in the render. There's a lot of reasons for this I'm not going to get into, but let's just quickly go Shift A, search, get a mesh plane. And let's just tab into edit mode. Let's just right click and go subdivide, just so we can see it easier in the wireframe. Tab back out. And let's go to our object properties for this. Let's just go down and let's turn it off in the render. We don't want to see it in the render. And we're going to go down to display as, and let's make it wire. Under the viewport display, tab into edit mode. Let's just go E to extrude and extrude that down. Okay, just having a bit of thickness there is going to help later on. But what we have now is this object. And let's go over to our physics properties. And let's give that a rigid body. And let's make that passive. And let's go down to the surface response. And let's make the, under here, actually under the sensitivity, let's add a collision margin. Let's make it 0.0001. And let's grab our phone here. Let's give it a rigid body. Now we're going to leave this one as active because it's going to be the active thing in our simulation. Let's leave the shape as convex hull. Don't need to change that, just like this one before. The main difference here is just it's set to active. And with the collision margin, let's just make that 0.001. And let's just test it by going to frame 1. And let's go into our front orthographic view and press the spacebar and see what happens. Okay, you can see here it just falls immediately. Don't worry too much about that. Let's just go to frame 1 again. Let's rotate it this time. Double tap R actually, just to rotate it a little bit off to the side like that. So from the top, we want to rotate it a little bit like this. From the front, we want it kind of pointing down to this bit that's going to get cracked. Now on frame 1, if you hit the spacebar again, you can see it looks a lot better. Okay, now it's up to you to come to frame 1 back and forth and just find something that you think looks good. Keep running it. So I like this one. So at frame 1, something like this looks good. I might just make it a little bit higher. Okay, now I'm going to try that again. Okay, that looks good. So what we need to do as well on top of that, we want this to kind of have slow motion to it. So a simple way to do that, it's a lot easier than you might think, is to come over, which is under just scene properties. You got to go to rigid body world. And you're going to go under there and you're going to go to the speed here. And let's just set that speed to 0.08. And now if you go to frame 1 and hit the spacebar, you can see this happens really slowly. But at about frame, let's just say frame 95. At about frame 95, we want the simulation to really speed up. Okay, so at frame 95, we have a speed value of 0.080. We're going to come here and on frame 95, we're going to hit this little button here to add in a keyframe for that value. And then we're going to drag it up to 100. And at frame 100, we're just going to make that 1. And then we're going to click on the keyframe button again. So what's going to happen now, if we go to frame 1 and hit the spacebar, we're going to get our simulation happening slowly, in slow motion, and then suddenly it just kicks in. So see that? Let's have a look at that again. So slow motion, hits the floor, and then speeds up. And we're going to do the same thing with our particle system. Now feel free to come in here and to change the starting location of this as much as you want until you think it looks a little bit better. But that's what I'm kind of going for. Okay, that looks really cool. Okay, so now let's just make sure to save. And let's just also bake this rigid body simulation, so it's baked into a file. So let's just go to our cache. Under our cache, let's just make the end frame value 150. And now let's just click on bake, and let's bake this into our file. And now you can see it's baked. If you want to change anything now, you have to delete the bake again and then change things and then bake it again. But you can see here, this is what we have. And that's looking really cool. So before we go any further, let's just actually quickly organize things a little bit here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hide the stage light by turning off that little eye there. We don't need to see the light. And this plane that we added in for our rigid body simulation, I'm just going to take that and I'm going to actually press M, create a new collection and call it extras. And I'm just going to go OK. And for now, I'm just going to hide that as well. So now we've got the stage and the extras turned off. So that's the light and that's the extras. What we have now here is just our main collection and our glass. In fact, I'm going to take this glass screen and I'm just going to drag it into the main collection. And then now we just have this empty collection called glass. I'm just going to delete that. So we have our main collection here. Let's just double click on it, call it phone. This is pretty much our phone. And then we have our stage and we have our extras. A lot more organized. Now what we want to do, that we have our baked out little rigid body here, is we want to add some particles. So that's quite simple. Let's go Shift A. Let's just add in an object to emit. We're going to add in a cube. Scale that way down, about this much. And then go to the point where the phone makes contact, right? So just drag through it, and at the point where contact happens, make sure you place that cube right there. Tab into edit mode, right click, just subdivide it about twice, and then get your smooth tool and just round it out a little bit like this. Tab back out, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go G, Z, move this object up a bit just so it's at the corner here. Then go Control A and make sure to apply that scale. That's super important. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and give it some particles. So we're going to go to our particles and our particle properties, click new. And if you now play it, you can see this is emitting particles, but they're way too big. So what we're going to do is we're going to go under our particle properties. We're going to scroll down to viewport display. Let's just take the size. Let's make it 0.01 for now. In fact, let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it 0.001. Okay, so it's even smaller, something like that. Okay, so now if we go to frame 1 and hit the spacebar, you can see particles are going in everywhere. We actually want them to interact with the floor as well. So for a start, let's just go and enable our extras. Remember this floor here? Let's go to our physics properties and let's give it a collision. Let's just turn it off again. And now let's go to frame 1, hit the spacebar. And you should see they're now kind of bouncing off. What we may have to do is just go in here and just delete some of these bottom verts like this. Okay, just like that. So you can see here, it's now interacting with the floor here, which is great, but you can see it's just kind of spurting out everywhere, and that's not what we want. So let's just go back to our particle settings and let's do a few things here now that it's interacting with the ground. For a start, we don't want these particles to be emitted right throughout the thing. We want it to start right where the phone hits. So in this case, it's at about frame 44 or 45. So I'm going to go with 45. Let's go with 45. So we're going to come now to our frame start, and that's going to be 45. And we only want it to emit to frame 50 because there's no sense in having it emit particles the whole time. It's only when it initially smashes. So now let's go to frame 1, hit the spacebar, and now you're going to see what happens there. See that? And that's all good, but all of the particles kind of just come out at once. We'll deal with that in a second, but you get the idea here. We also just want to take that lifetime and make it 100 so our particles don't just disappear. Okay, that's better. But at the same time, the physics here isn't looking quite right. It's going way too fast for a start. So let's go down to the physics, and under the integration, let's take the timestamp and let's make it 0.02 instead. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, so now it's a bit slower. Let's just keep going down to 0.01. Okay, you can see it's getting slower and slower, which is really good. And let's just also go up to the top again. Let's go under our source. Let's just go down here and make sure it's set to faces, which it is. In the distribution, we want it to be random. So let's go to frame 1, see what that looks like. Okay, that's better. And let's just also go to the velocity. And we're going to take the Z here, we're going to make that 1. And let's run that again. So now it puts more emphasis on the top. It's going more up, as you can see there. But one more thing as well is there's just too many particles. So let's just go back up to the top under the emission. Let's just make it something like 50 for now. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's a lot better. We don't need too many. Cool, so now we have our particles working the way they need to. But the problem is that our phone here is going slow and speeding up. And we want our particles to do the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply go down under the physics, down to the integration. And we're going to take this time step value. And let's just drag all the way through to the point where we want the slow motion to turn off. So we can see here the phone all of a sudden just speeds up at about, let's see, about here. So at frame 87 roughly, we want this time step value here to be 0.001, which means it's going really slow. So let's just give that a keyframe. And let's just move up about 1 or 2 frames. And let's just make it 0.01, which means we're speeding it up. And let's just give it another keyframe. So now what's going to happen if we hit the spacebar? You can see it goes slow and then speeds up all of a sudden. Okay, so now we can see we have slow motion for both rigid body simulation and our particles. How cool is that? I suppose you can also take the phone itself, the actual rigid body object, and you can give that a collision as well. Go to frame 1, hit the spacebar, just so there's a bit of interaction with that and the phone as well. But you can see here that's working. We also now just need to tell it what objects. So let's just quickly make a collection of shrapnel for this particle system to reference. Okay, so we're gonna make some shards. Let's go Shift A, let's add in a cube. And let's just tab into edit mode, scale that all the way down. And the reason, once again, we're doing this in edit mode and not object mode, we'd have to go Control A and apply the scale every time. So just doing it in edit mode, just saves us a bit of time. So I'm just scaling it to a tiny little thing, tabbing back out to object mode, and I'm just gonna go G, move it up and to the side. And then I'm gonna press M, I'm gonna go new collection. Let's just call this shards. Now you can see here we have it. And by the way, this object here that makes the particles, let's just double click on it. Let's just call it particles. And let's just go M, new collection. Let's just call it particles as well, just so we're a bit more organized. And I drag that above the shards. And now what we're gonna do is we now have that cube, which I'm gonna call shard as well. We have that on the shards collection. I'm gonna tab into edit mode, and I'm just gonna go SX, scale it along the X, and then I'm just gonna get my editing going here, just making a sharp looking little bit of shard. Control R, maybe add in a little loop, and maybe scale this down a bit. Just use your imagination. Make some little shards like this, and then I'm gonna go Shift D to duplicate it. It's all on the same collection. I'm gonna rotate this one a little bit, scale it, maybe scale it on the X a bit, and then I'm gonna just do some editing with the geometry. Just making different little sized bits. Shift D, maybe rotate this one a little bit. You guys get the idea here, right? Maybe make some of them a bit smaller than others. So I have about 4 bits here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take each one of them and just go to the collection dropdown and give them the same kind of materials as the phone. So one of them I'm gonna make blue, like the phone cover, the phone color. And then some of them I'm gonna make glass. Most of them are gonna be the glass material. So I'm just gonna go glass, give them all the glass. If you now press Z and you go rendered, you should see they all have materials. Now they're all in a collection over here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our particle emitter. Let's go to our particles and then let's just go down to our render. And let's just change it as render as and make it a collection. Then we're gonna go instance collection and we're gonna make that shards. So now if we play our animation, we're gonna see this. Yeah, and actually it is happening, but they're really, really tiny. So what we're gonna do is just simply gonna go over to our scale here under the render. We're just gonna drag them up till we have the bits the size we want. Okay, you can also make the scale more random as well. Try out different things, but you get the idea here. All right, so now we have these bits like that. Little bits of shrapnel. And also with the emitter here, we want to go over under the render. We want to turn off show emitter under the render because we don't want to see it in the final render as well. But now we have that in place, let's also just quickly select our phone. Let's go over into our shading workspace and let's just make that crack happen at the right time. We also need to see our timeline. So over here in the shading workspace, just come over here, hover in this corner to see the little X, left click and drag up to create a new tab. And let's just make that a timeline. And what we want to do is we want to go into our front view and we want to drag through our timeline till the phone hits. So for me, it might be a little bit different for you guys, but for me, it's at exactly 45. So at frame 45, I'm going to come here, give this a value of 1. I'm going to press Z and go rendered. And now you can't see any of the crack. So on frame 45, I'm just going to go and press I, hovering over a value of 1. And then just one frame over, this happens super quick. I'm going to drag it all the way down to 0. Now we get the crack material and I'm going to press I, just one frame up to insert a keyframe for a value of 0. And now the crack should just appear. So we have no crack. And as it's going, all of a sudden it switches over till we have the crack. Now you can't see it because we need to actually go and enable our stage so we can see the light. But you can see here, no crack. And then as we're going through our animation, all of a sudden, past 45, we just have this crack appear. Now the crack will appear fast enough that even at slow motion, it'll just look like an instantaneous event. It's only when you get into like tens of thousands of frames a second, we can actually see the cracks traveling through glass. So it's one of those cool situations where we can get away with it. And that's it. We're done with that. So let's now quickly go back to our layout and let's hide those shards. We don't need to see them for now. And the particle emitter we'll leave in here. But let's now go Shift A, let's add in a plane, tab into edit mode and just select these two back verts and go E to extrude and then Z to extrude them up. And this is just going to be our backdrop. We're also going to just select these two verts over here, Control B to create a bevel and roll the middle mouse button to create a nice stage look. Tab back out, right click and go shade smooth. Okay, so now if we go into our front view, we can also go Shift A, we can add in a camera, G, Z, move it up, and then G, Y, move it back. I'm going to scale this camera down a bit because our phone is small, it's more up to scale. Then on our camera settings, we're going to make this 95 and the focal length. Then go into camera view and then double tap 0 to rotate your camera while you have it active. So we have a camera right here and then G, middle mouse button just to zoom in. If you're watching this, you should already know the basics of cameras in Blender, but you kind of get the idea here. So what we might want to do is come up at frame 1, move our camera up here, go I and insert a location. And then as our phone is falling, at about 47, we're going to bring the camera down and then G, Z, zoom in a little bit and then go I, insert a location. And this tutorial isn't really about the camera animation so much, but you guys can do whatever you want. And then at about frame 80, we'll just zoom in a little bit more and then go I, insert a location. So let's have a look at that. Okay, it looks really cool. And then maybe at 130, I'll just go G and just move the camera over a little bit, insert a location rotation, just so it's not static, it's just a little bit of movement. Maybe move it up a little bit. As you guys get the idea here anyway, like I said, it's not really about the camera animation. I'm just trying to kind of have a view here of the phone falling. So now if we press Z and we go rendered, we can kind of see that our background here is really bright. So let's just quickly select the background. Let's go to our materials. Let's give that a material and let's just make it black. Not all the way black, but mostly black. And let's just go make it metallic. And then bring its roughness down a bit to make it more reflective. So it picks up the reflection of the phone. And we can also, for that bit where it goes really fast, we can enable under our render settings, we can go down and let's enable motion blur. And this is under our render settings, also just make the render amount 100 for the samples. Otherwise it's going to take way too long to render. And make sure that the denoise is also enabled. And let's just go to something like this and let's just quickly go render image and see what it looks like. So in this case, you can see the cracks there, but it's not showing really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my light, I'm going to go back into the rendered view, and I'm just going to go and rotate it and move it around till I see that showing up a little bit better. I'm also just going to go to my world environment, and I'm also just going to go and rotate that sky texture we added in earlier by going under the sun rotation, just till I see the crack showing up a little bit more. So mess around with your lighting situation as much as you want. I might also just duplicate this light. The idea here is we just want to catch those reflections on the glass so we can kind of see those cracks happening there. So over here you can see we really see that crack quite well. I'm just going to go render image, see what that looks like. And there you can see we have that crack a lot more visible. So what you're going to have to do is go back and forth between the shading and your scene setup and change the lights a little bit. Also just mess around with this color ramp here till the cracks look just right. But that's kind of what I did with mine. My original was pretty much just like this. And then once you have a result that you like, you can just go to your output, select the output destination on your computer under the output folder, and then you can change your file format. For example, you can make it FFmpeg video. You can give it an encoder and make the container something like an MP4. And then you can go render and render out the animation. So that has been this phone tutorial. Like I said, it was mainly on teaching you guys the actual phone smashing part of it. You guys can do different animations with your camera. You can add more fancy background environments, stuff like that. But you guys get the idea here. I am going to be uploading my file to Patreon if you guys want to check that out in the description below. But other than that, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and here you can see it's just one of the final results I got by toying around with this a little bit more. But everything you saw here is exactly what I did to get the same result. I'll see you guys next time for another tutorial, and thank you for watching.